Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form, and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
Pete Williams, welcome to the Site Shed podcast.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Super excited to be here.
Absolutely. You came referred to me from my friend and coach, Troy, from Mavericks.
He's a superstar. He's a superstar. I've known him for quite a while.
I read your book, Cadence. Excellent. I loved it. A good little story for you guys out there. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the principles in today's podcast from that book. So for you guys that want to go check that out, you can get it through cadencebook.com. Amongst other places, right? I'm pretty sure I got it through Audible, actually.
It's where all good books are sold. Yeah, the audiobook won Audiobook of the Year about 2 years ago, I think it would have been. So, yeah, it's Audible and all those sort of places, iTunes, stuff like that, yeah.
It's like an easy read, isn't it? Like, I think I ripped through it in a couple of gym sessions because I listened to that one. But,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
really
Well,
good.
we turned into a story because I think, so many business books can be very dry, hard to get through, not that engaging and all that sort of stuff. So when I was writing it, it started out like a bland, boring, traditional business book. And then I kind of realized, hang on, this is not going to be really that fun to read. And for the audience, it's really for the small business owners who maybe haven't had that traditional business experience before or business training. Mm-hmm. So it turned into a parable. So it's a story. So it's a story about a bike store owner who's struggling to grow his little small business and starts training an athlete who's actually a successful business guy. And during those training sessions, they both, I guess, help each other grow. One as an athlete and one as a business owner. So, yeah, the story kind of makes it easy to digest. It kind of makes the lesson stick. And as you said, it's an easy, fun listen.
Yeah, there's another one I read not too long ago called, actually, I had the author whose name was John Warrilow. He wrote a book called
Built to Sell.
Was it Built to Sell, which was the story, or was it The Art of Selling Your Business? I can't remember. It was one of them, but it was
Built to Sell was his first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And funnily enough, I tracked down John's editor, so she actually was the editor of my book too. So
oh, really?
That could be why there's some similarities. Yeah. So tracked down Brooke to help out on that one because I loved Built to Sell from John. So I went, all right. Well, when we're pivoting the book to that sort of style, let's go and see if we can track down the person who made that one work. And yeah, lo and behold, it seemed to work for me too.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So I love those sort of story narratives where it takes you on a bit of a journey. Like you say, sometimes business books can be a bit one track, but I encourage you guys out there to go and check that out because it's a relatable read, I think, for the better part.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Anyway, today we're going to be talking about some of the principles from within that book. And so I know you talk about 7 different areas within business within the book, and I guess we're going to delve into some of those today. And I know we should probably start with what you do and a bit about, I suppose, where you're at these days. I know you've got your finger in a lot of pies, but I suppose primarily the Preneur Group would be of interest to a lot of listeners out there.
Yeah, totally. So I guess there's 2 kind of big worlds in which I kind of try and break up my life. So there's the Preneur Group, which is sort of the business that we have that has a portfolio of companies that we invest in, that we consult through, and that's kind of how I kind of leverage a lot of my time and take some of the principles we'll talk about and help them with businesses that we work with or we have investment in or whatever it might be. And then there's a telco group. So for 15 plus years now, I've had a telecommunications group. There's 3 or 4 companies in that group. We started off as a phone system sales and support business. So we'd sell and install phone systems primarily up and down the east coast of Australia. Mm-hmm. We expanded that into a headset business. So we're the largest headset retailer in Australia now. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, we started a carrier. So I think Telstra, BT, AT&T in the US, just a phone carrier, but obviously we're not that big yet. So that's sort of the third business in the group that's been sort of flying over the last few years. So that's sort of where I spend a good chunk of my time is in that telco group. But like most teenagers, it's 15 years old. Most teenagers are self-sufficient. it's kind of like that way too.
Yeah.
Just needs a bit of direction and push every now and again. And then obviously the Preneur Group stuff, which is a lot of fun, working with a whole range of companies in different sectors all around the world.
Nice. Cool. All right. Well, so what led you to write Cadence book?
Yeah, so I think the whole thing is from our businesses. One of the things, if we go back to the telco business that I mentioned earlier. So when we started that business, we're not telco guys. We don't have trade experience. We're not actual technicians to actually cablers or sparkies or even phone system technicians. My business partners and I, we're fundamentally business owners and marketers that. We kind of realized that, this is 15 years ago, there was this thing called Google that was sort of starting to actually take hold in Australia. It sounds kind of funny thinking Google's early days because it's such a prevalent thing these days, but, it did start somewhere at some point. And we realized that at that time, a lot of business owners and office managers were going to places like the internet to, find solutions to their problems. They were going, okay, I need a new phone system. They'd go to Google to try and, find a provider. And we realized no one was really dealing with that space at all in Australia. So my business partner had another telco-ish related business. But when I became a partner, we pivoted the business and went after that space. And the way we started was purely from a marketing perspective. We'd do the marketing, we'd generate the leads, we'd make the sale. And then when it came to actually doing the installation, what happened was we actually outsourced it. So we'd find a subcontractor, a local Sparky or a local telco guy in Perth or in Sydney or Brisbane or whatever it might be. And we'd basically give the client to them to go and install effectively because we needed someone to actually physically install the system, program up and train the person. Mm-hmm. And that was really good. We scaled really, really fast. We kind of were able to lean into our strengths and not have to worry about, the installation, the technical side of stuff. But the problem was we kind of hit this glass ceiling pretty quickly in that we couldn't kind of increase our revenue over a certain kind of point. And we started trying to figure out, well, what was causing that? And we started to sort of sit down and go, well, let's look at, what's driving our revenue, our business, what's driving our profits, and then start looking at other companies and other businesses, not just in our space, but in all different spaces to try and figure out, well, what drives revenue and drives profit in the business and where were we kind of dropping the ball effectively? And what we realized was that at the time, a big chunk of our problem was that we were, as I said, giving our customers effectively to our competitors in that when someone wanted to expand this system or come back and buy again, who are they going to call? They weren't going to call us. They were going to call a person who actually turned up and, did the installation, did the training, gave them the experience they really had. So that was a big hole in our businesses. We just didn't have any repeat business. And I'm sure from, past episodes of the podcast and stuff, the ability to get repeat business is crucial for the lifetime of any business. It's more cost effective. It's, all the obvious things. So that kind of started to lead us down this path of going, well, what drives profit in every business and where else we're not thinking about things? And that kind of led us to this discovery, for want of a better term. It sounds a bit weird to discover something in this regard, but we kind of, over a period of time, kind of realized there's only really 7 things that drive revenue and profit in any business. And that's when we kind of started using that as our framework of focus. And then that really was what scaled our businesses across all the different sectors, the e-com headset business, the telco business, the services business and stuff like that. And then just as our growth sort of grew and, I started getting asked questions about how our growth was growing and all that sort of stuff. And then started talking about this framework, this 7 levers framework. And the more and more people sort of just asked me to kind of, sit on a panel and share our story or share our, insights and stuff, it kind of just developed into this book effectively that, it was like, well, it's, rather than sitting on a panel or doing a podcast every day or whatever it might be, let's put it into a book and actually kind of share the lessons and the stuff that's really been important for us. Because I think so many business owners, and I know I've got some really good friends who are sparkies and carpenters and chippies and stuff like that, and they're really good on the tools. They are exceptionally good on the tools. But at no point through their apprenticeship do they really get business training. And I think that's a massive flaw in our industry. I know a good mate of mine, Scott Pape, the Barefoot Investor, and I've had numerous chats about how can we kind of figure out a way to provide better training for apprentices to actually, as you go through, because you might even know the numbers here, Matt. I don't know the stats, but like what percentage of actual apprentices end up running their own business, even if it's a 1 or 2 man band? Like it's got to be massive, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is the reason why I started the site shed was that exactly. Because I used to be a plumber and I went through that whole process myself and then started a business and had no idea. Like essentially, and I suppose as well, you've got to take into consideration, from the other end of the spectrum, when you look at a TAFE curriculum, they can only put so much into it.
Totally.
And so,
100%.
I mean, you can't exactly blend in an MBA into a plumbing certificate. But the
100%.
point being, from taste perspective, at the end of your trade course, you basically get your license, and then essentially once you have your license, you can go and practice, which is really, really not great.
It's scary, I think.
The other thing as well is that there's a lot of, especially for some trades, like you look at builders, for example, right? And these guys have got to put up with a lot of crap and a lot of stuff they don't know, and they're essentially leaving a trade course and being put in charge of potentially millions of dollars, and they don't know how to manage. And it's not necessarily their fault, but it's certainly their responsibility to figure out, how to go about this, which is why so many of them end up in that project management space. And, and so many builders these days aren't even builders. They're just lawyers and accountants.
And I think that's a problem, I think, is like you get really, really good on your tools, but being great at your craft doesn't mean you're great at running a business, because they are two completely different skill sets. And I think that's where a big gap is. And that's sort of, where the book's been super helpful. And that's, as I said earlier, why we kind of made it accessible through a parable story. So that's the way to go. Because, being great at, running cable or putting up drywall or whatever it might be is one thing. But, how do you actually get new inquiries? How do you make sure that customer actually, spends the right revenue with you or the maximum amount of revenue with you? How do you get them to come back to you again? How do you manage your expenses? These are the things that really actually make a business. Being good at your craft, unfortunately, very rarely makes a good business. You might get referrals from being really good at your craft and giving a good experience, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to be a profitable business. And I think that's a skill set that some people need to actually spend time working on. And that's where, for us, this framework becomes that area of focus, in that, like, the 7 things, like, what am I doing each month or each week or each year on these 7 areas? And then once you get clear on that, and we can talk about these areas, it's probably worth doing pretty soon. We're talking about it, not to it. In that, like, that helps you when you get off the tools, every now and again to work on your business, where to focus. And that's the key thing that I think has been super helpful for people.
Yeah. And look, I think in fairness, we're kind of, and I say this a lot on the show, we're kind of preaching to the choir here, because people that are watching this or listening to this are people that want to learn this kind of stuff. And they're probably the type of business that does take a bit of time, perhaps not as much as they should, but they take some time in the strategic side of their business. However, having these frameworks in place, I think, is super important for people to understand where to apply that attention. Yeah. And I know that's something that I've definitely slipped up on over the years, and now I've got a really good process around it. But I'm constantly refining that process. I should add, I don't ever treat that as a destination. It's always a journey.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to hear, when I read that book about the 7 levers that you talk about, and I think it's also interesting to put into perspective that regardless of the businesses, it's very often the same levers. And, I quite often get that argument where it's like, well, you don't understand my business. And I'm like, oh, really? Because you're so different, because you're a glazier or whatever. Like, people just get caught up in their own ego, probably more than anything, about,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if we, let's go through it. We may as well break it down. Let's, maybe use it. Let's use a Sparky as an example as we explain it. We may as well sort of make it real for some of the listeners. And I think hopefully the glazier who's listening or the plumber can kind of at least sort of see the relevance to a Sparky business. So effectively, when it comes down to the businesses, that there's only 7 things that drive profit. And if you understand and can actually match these 7 areas to your business and then start working on them, it's pretty impactful. So firstly, it's suspects. Like, how are you driving new inquiries or new awareness of your business? That's effectively what a suspect is. How do you get more people to know about your Sparky business, about the services you offer and things like that? That's pretty straightforward. The second step is, or the second framework, or the second lever really, is prospects. So it's what percentage of those suspects actually engage with your business, take some sort of micro commitment or step closer to becoming a customer. So it might be someone who actually calls up and gets the quote for the extra PowerPoints or running some Cat 5 around the house, whatever it might be, whatever it is. They basically take some sort of step. If you go to a car yard, it's taking the test drive, is that micro commitment. It's trying on a pair of shoes at the running shoe store. There's always some sort of micro commitment that gets made from finding you to actually buying you. There's a step in between that most people just don't forget or even think about what that looks like. So I think you need to identify what that step is, because you can control that, influence that, and you talk to the people differently once they actually have that micro commitment or that step forward.
We commonly refer to that as like a lead magnet in
absolutely
podcasts.
Perfect example. So what sort of lead magnet do you have? How do you get someone to engage? Perfect analogy. Third step is obviously conversions, getting that person to actually take that that step and actually agree to use your services. They're going to get you to do the work that's required. Then you've got, once you've got them as a customer, how do you maximize the revenue you get from them? Well, there's effectively three ways. Firstly, it's average item price. What are you doing to increase the price of that products or services in this example that you offer? How do you justify a higher price per PowerPoint? How do you justify a higher price per end or whatever it might be? What are you doing in your services to do that? How do you get the person to buy the more expensive outlet or the more higher grade quality coax, whatever it might be, to actually then say, yep, okay, I'm going to buy the better quality glass than this entry level glass? How do you get them to actually take that decision and go up a step if we use that glaze example?
Like upselling rather than raising prices.
Well, no, it's upselling, or it could be either. It's effectively just how do you get people to actually spend more money on the items they buy? Are they going to buy the more expensive panel of glass? Are they going to buy the more expensive running shoe?
Sure.
Or how do you just justify charging more for the same product? It could be either or. It's about just getting more revenue for the product you sell. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. And then the second part is where it comes to, and people have these different definitions, cross-selling, upselling. How do you get them to buy the extra items? How do you get them to buy the fries, if that we use an overused McDonald's example? So they come, and for example, I had a Sparky come recently to my house. We just recently moved, and we have an infrared sauna in our garage. So we had to come in and get a new PowerPoint put in with the different kind of PowerPoint outlet. I don't know what it's called, but effectively, the extra earthing in the PowerPoint for the sauna. So he came to do that. And while he was there, he noticed that on our front porch, there was a hole above the door where the sensor light used to be. But when we moved into this new house, for whatever reason, the sensor light was removed, wasn't there. And he said, oh, hey, while I'm here, do you want me to fix that and put that back in for you? I'm like, oh, yeah, perfect. I hadn't even thought about that. It wasn't even on our radar. But he, as he walked around the house, effectively tried to find ways to actually offer me more value. And I'm like, yeah, great. So he effectively sold the fries with a solution. He's like, I came to do this, but how else do you solve these extra problems?
I had a similar experience last week with a Sparky, actually. They came out to run some Cat6 cables and stuff for an internet connection, and they went, oh, awesome. These are all halogens. Why don't we replace these with LEDs? I'm like, done.
Yeah. And it's just about, well, what systems do you have in place? This is the thing. It's like, oh, it's obvious, but how do you have a system in place to sort of do that every single time? When you quote up your particular glazing work or your plumbing work, we also do X, Y, and Z on your invoices or on your quotes. So, pardon the pun, it sparks ideas. It's more awareness. Yeah, exactly right. Mm-hmm. Then you've got the sixth sort of lever that you have in terms of ways to pull revenue and pull profit into your business is transactions per client. Going back to that example.
So what was the fifth? I've got number 4 as maximized.
We've got suspects, prospects, conversions. There's your first 3. Yeah. Then we've got average item price and items per sale. So there's your 4 and 5th. So they're 2 separate things if you actually break it down. It's like, how do I get people to buy the more expensive, bad example, but for whatever reason, my son loves the block. And during the block last season, there was ads on where the actual PowerPoint, you could actually take the fascia off the front of the PowerPoint and you could buy different colors and different textures. So you actually sort of change the mood of the room with a different PowerPoint plastic sheet. But my son thought it was the coolest thing ever. Anyway, my point is, I'm assuming that is more expensive than a plain white PowerPoint outlet. So when you're saying we want to increase our average item price, it's like, well, how do you convince your client to buy that power outlet or buy the power outlet with the USB sockets in the wall? Mm-hmm. Like that would be a way to say, I'm going to charge you higher for the same socket. That's increasing average item price. But then you've got, while I'm there, I'm going to do the sensor light. That's more items per sale. So there's 2 differentiations there that I think a lot of people sort of blend into one and don't see are actually 2 different decisions the customer makes.
I know what you mean.
And then we've got, transactions per client, that's the 6th. That's about how do you get people to come back and buy again? How do you have a system in place that they will use you for that next time that you want to run some more Cat5 cable, or you need to replace some more halogen lights, or you want to put a TV out on the balcony next to the bar fridge you put outside, or whatever it might be. How do you make sure that you're the person they come back to, and how are you proactively doing that? Because I think, again, I know you guys talk about it on the show with past guests, is hoping and praying is not a good strategy. You've got to have a system in place to keep in contact with these people. And then finally is your margins. How are you managing your expenses? How are you actually making sure you're managing the cash flow in your business, your expenses, to maximize your profit? So effectively, they're the 7 areas. And for a lot of your listeners, it's probably, they all make sense. There's nothing drastically new in that. But the question I ask for a lot of people is, how often are you taking time off the tools to actually sit down and look at each of these 7 areas separately in an isolated fashion. I think everyone's sort of there, how do I get more traffic? How do I get more eyeballs to my website? That's suspect. Great. But how often do you sit down and go, how am I improving the number of items I'm selling every time I visit a client? What am I doing this month to reach out to past clients to get them to come back and buy from me again? And I think that's the real differentiator for a lot of business owners is when they get off the tools, you actually consciously focus on each of these 7 areas. Because the thing that blew our mind away, which we didn't kind of realize at the time, and it was only after sort of, playing with this areas of focus for a while and really helping us get clear on these areas and seeing growth, we actually did some numbers. And the thing that really blew our mind was that if you increase each of these 7 areas by just 10%, so you basically go, okay, our average item price right now is $100 per service we do or item we sell. We're going to try and raise that to 110 by either increasing prices or upselling to a more expensive, the large fries rather than the medium fries. Mm-hmm. Or we're going to get 1 in 10 people to buy a second item. We're going to get 1 in 10 people to actually, get us to put in an extra PowerPoint or that sensor light, whatever it might be. So you're trying to increase all the areas by just 10%. So it's, small tweaks, nothing too drastic. The crazy thing was it actually doubles the profit of your business. Mm-hmm. This is not some sort of, motivational speech. Like mathematically, if you increase each of the areas by 10%, just get 10% more visitors to your website next month. Just get 10% more people to, request a quote or download the lead magnet, or you get 10% more people to come back and buy from you again. Just those small, really achievable 10% wins. The actual cumulative effect is the doubling of your profit.
I'm surprised it's that conservative, to be honest.
Yeah, it's actually 96.4, so it's just under double. But effectively, it's pretty crazy to go, well, I'm not going to try and be Babe Ruth or Donald Bradman and try and hit 100, hit a home run every time. I'm just going to try and make small incremental tweaks in all these 7 areas. Mm-hmm. The momentum you get is massive. And that's what really revolutionized our approach to business. It's like, all right, fine. When we're not, on the tools per se, or, selling phone systems or whatever it might be, or, on the tools running cable, it's okay. We're going to be working on our business and we're going to be focusing on trying to improve each of these 7 areas in isolation as a focus area and just trying to get 10% increases. And just the momentum of that has just been revolutionary for us, really changed the trajectory of our business.
So is this purely focused on doubling profit?
Effectively, yeah. So
because I look at those levers and I think I could pretty much throw all of them into either marketing or accounting.
So effectively,
which leaves out a lot of HR, a lot of other
question. So let me give you an example of how HR can play, and that's a really good example. So let me give you an example. One of the things that I won't go into too much, but I run a program at Deakin University teaching this stuff, and I know you're aware of it. But one of the clients we had, ironically, here's a perfect example for you, Matt. One of the clients we had in the program, basically, they're a digital agency. So they do websites for Shopify stores. So not traders like you guys do. I know you guys do phenomenal work in that area. But for e-commerce stores, these guys focus on digital agency services, web design, that sort of stuff. And they came in and the client and the student consulting group looked at the business and went, okay, let's map the 7 levers to the business, understand how the agency worked. And for this business, they realized that obviously all their expenses are primarily just about wages. There's not a lot of overhead. There's not, there's not a lot of, stock to buy or machinery to run or anything like that. It's just basically labor. So when they were trying to figure out how do we actually, help this business grow and get a 10% win in one of these areas, that was the promise of the program, is that we'll give you a 10% increase in one of the areas. They looked at the business and went, all right, well, if we can actually get the team to be more efficient and productive, that will mean we can get one more job done per quarter, and that revenue will go straight to the bottom line. So we're improving our margins by 10%, which is that 7th lever I spoke about. We're going to get a 10% win in our margins by having our team be more productive. So what they recommended to the client, this design agency, was a full HR program around engagement, productivity, and enhancement. So they did stuff like they recommended, well, we looked at the sick leave and we realized that the amount of sick leave that this team was having was kind of above average. So they went and put in this process and program and saying, well, if you don't use all your sick leave, you'll get these bonuses. So they incentivize the staff to not take sick leave when they've got a little bit of a scratchy nose. And that what happened was sick leave went down and staff got more work done in a particular quarter. And they put in some training programs. So there was like 2 hours a week now invested in training around communication with clients and time management and email management. So the staff got less admin time being done because they were getting more efficient with talking to customers, managing clients' expectations, communicating via email, setting expectations. So they actually had more time programming and actually getting websites done quicker. So you can get on the surface, you go, oh, it's all about marketing and just managing your expenses from an accounting perspective. But if you look at going, how do I increase my margins in my business? That's the question you ask when you're working on that lever, for example. You go, well, hang on, what drives our margins? Well, it's really our expense base, which is our staff. How do we get more out of our staff? We get more efficiency. HR problem. So that particular student group was like 5 or 6 students. There was a couple of HR majors in that group, and they were like, bang, here's how HR applies. And they applied all their experience from their course so far around improving that area through that. To give you an example with Athlete's Foot, I used to work at Athlete's Foot back in my university days. One of the things they train their sales staff on is this thing called the greet and seat rules. So traditionally, if you walk into a retail store, they try and sell you straight away. Athlete's Foot realized what their micro commitment was, their version of a lead magnet or that prospect process was getting people to sit down and try on a pair of shoes. So they train their staff from a sales training perspective to not try and sell someone on a pair of shoes, get them to try on a pair of shoes. When you walk into the store, their whole idea is to greet and seat you, not greet and sell you, greet and seat you. So it's a sales training scenario. It's not marketing, it's actually sales training. So yeah, on the surface, you're absolutely right. It does appear to be just accounting and marketing, but effectively you can look into all this sort of stuff. Data analytics. How do you actually use your data analysis to actually pull apart, where your segments of clients are, where they're spending, geographically where they're based? How do you get more efficiency with that sort of stuff to, get businesses back? One of the things we did in our telco, which was our service department, which is kind of like the trade effectively. One of the things we did is we looked at our data and realized that, well, hang on, when our technicians are actually in certain areas, why don't we send an SMS the night before to clients saying, hey, Scott, our technician's going to be in the northern suburbs tomorrow afternoon. He's got 2.5 hours free in the afternoon. If you're interested, we'll waive the call out fee and save you $100, and we can do some reprogramming of your phone system. There's something you've been sitting on not wanting to do. And that drove transactions and repeat business for us in that service division by thinking about data analytics, going, well, how do we get more efficiency with our staff when they're out on the road? They're already in the northern suburbs. Let's reach people, give them an offer to use us again. And that was more based on data analytics that kind of found that opportunity as opposed to marketing. So there are ways to kind of look at it in different ways.
It's interesting, and I've said this before on the show. Regardless of what business you're in, and regardless of whether or not you like it or not, you're in the data capture business. And we help businesses. We set them up with CRM so they can tag customers and all this kind of stuff, right? Which they don't really appreciate until they might want to run a campaign and they've got the data in their system where they can target.
That's people. It, exactly. And that's the stuff. You have all that information there, and it's like, okay, now how do we actually use this to increase each of these different levers? And you actually kind of look at them in isolation. It's super helpful.
And the other thing, I suppose, tying back to that explanation you just gave, then I suppose in retort to me saying that it was essentially everything falls into marketing or accounting. But I've recently read, and I put a lot of effort lately over the last few months into creating processes within the business which tie to achievable outcomes for team members and for myself and for the company. And you probably would have read John Doerr's book, Measure What Matters. There's another great book by Dr. Jeff Smart called Who, and it ties to scorecards. And essentially the premise of it, and to paraphrase, 2 books into one sentence, it's all about, I suppose, giving people actionable outcomes for their specific roles, as opposed to these are your roles and responsibilities, great, whatever, but like this is what you have to achieve over the next 90 days. And if I look at, say, some of these here, where, for example, you might say, well, we want to increase our conversions by 10%, you basically cannot potentially do that without bringing on a salesperson. So there's kind of systemic things that happen in the background there that mean you can't achieve these actionable tasks without involving HR and without involving delivery and development and without involving, all these kind of different departments within your organization. So I understand what you're saying here.
Well, it's a perfect question. Some of the audience might not have. So it was a perfect question to ask. It led me to give that story. But that's the thing is, I think, this is the interesting thing. It's about, and I know you preach this as well to your audience, is that it's about getting off the tools regularly and figuring out where am I going to spend my time. And I think, There's a great book that came out years and years ago called The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, which was sort of the first kind of book that kind of really talked about this working in versus working on kind of scenario. And I think a lot of people have heard like, get off the tools and work on your business. But, I think the problem is it's like, well, what do you work on when you're off the tools? What do you focus on? Where do you actually spend your attention? And I think, frameworks like the 7 levers and others out there kind of give you that framework to focus on. It's like, okay, these are the things I need to be looking at. And the thing is, it's not always about traffic. It's not always about getting new people to your website or new people to Google listing page or to see you in whatever else you're doing to drive awareness. It's about thinking, well, how do you get more people to actually take that lead magnet, engage, inquire for a quote? How do you get more people to actually take that upsell? And how are you presenting that? How are you making that person be aware of the extra things you do? I know a water supply company that I've done a bit of work with over the last 12 months. One of the things they do is when they send their technicians out on jobs, they actually have this checklist and they go out to do a particular job. Look at the water pump on the irrigation on the person's farm, whatever it might be. While they're there, they say, look, I'm here. I'm going to do our 11-step check while I'm here every single time. And it's this little checklist that goes through like all the other things that, would help that farmer be more efficient with their water and their irrigation. And effectively, it's like a free health check almost, if one of a better term. But what that does is it looks official. It looks like we're actually doing it as a supportive thing, not a sales thing, but it actually always uncovers more services and more options to sell, new filter pumps or new filter canisters or a follow-up visit next time. And like that's something that, I know a lot of traders have implemented too. It's like, well, when you go to site to do a particular job, while you're there, spend an extra 6 minutes just doing some sort of, sparky health check. Yep. And you give it to the client and go, look, here's some things you might want to be aware of and think about. We can do some of these things today for like $12 or $50. This might be something you want to get us back to do in the future. No pressure selling, but it just from a safety health check perspective, it's going to set alarm bells off in your client's mind to go, oh shit, I better get this stuff sorted. And, simple things like that. So you're spending an afternoon one day going, okay, let's think about all the different things we can offer a client. How do we put that in a health check as a way to always attempt to increase items per sale? And you just have your team do that every single visit. And you make it one of the KPIs that you just sort of reference to them at in terms of like, this is something that all our team have to do before they leave site is do this audit or health check. Give a copy to the client, bring them back to the office, and then you can use a CRM to follow up and market those particular services or opportunities. Like that's a idea of a way to sort of spend time off the tools, focusing on one of these areas and building that kind of campaign or that system out to sort of take your example.
Interestingly, well, a couple of things. So with trade businesses, and we put a lot of emphasis with a lot of our content into essentially what you've spoken about here with helping businesses create systems within their organization. And you can call them checklists or whatever it is. A checklist essentially would form part of a system. You would hope when people go out to, out to a job, they're following some sort of procedure, which essentially is there to help them create a bit of consistency with the way they deliver a product or a service or whatever it might be. And that's a big thing because a lot of guys, when they're bringing new technicians in, for example, or they hire someone new, they might have their way of doing something, which is not your way. And so we find a really good way to alleviate that is through, like you say, having some sort of checklist or checklists for teams to follow.
Yeah, love it.
Essentially as well, it's almost a liability compliance thing, especially if you're in an industry like electrical, because you have a responsibility to provide your customer or your client with information that is relevant to their electrical services. And if you touch anything in that house that's related to their electricity, you better make sure that you're backing it up with information on things that may need to be done either now or in the future. So it's almost changed. It shifts that mindset from I'm trying to upsell to I need to do this to be a provider that's complying, right?
Yeah.
So it's a slightly different mindset shift. The other thing is we found with a lot of trade businesses, and going back to how getting off the tools and all this kind of conversation, we've found that a lot of the focus for the listeners and viewers out there that are in the trades is they want to be on the tools. And so their biggest strength, because they've spent years studying at TAFE and they've spent years building houses, their biggest strengths are not like building the business, coming up with marketing plans, coming up with all these processes and all this kind of stuff. Their biggest strength is out in the job, swinging hammers and managing their guys. So when it comes to systemizing a trade business, very often the goal for systemizing a trade business is to remove the business owner from doing the managerial stuff that they don't know anything about and keeping them out on site. And so there's this whole, in our industry, there's this, get off the tools bullshit. And like every single D-grade business coach and program out there markets towards that, when the reality is what the guys really want is to be able to be on the tools more and be able to free themselves up from doing the other stuff, which they suck at.
Love it. I think that's a really, really good look at it too. I think I applaud you for kind of, being aware of that, because I think you're right. I think that's, there's not like, there becomes this, and I think it's called the Peter principle, which is nothing to do with me, but I think that's the term of it, where you kind of, you end up sort of like promoting yourself or people to like the one level above their being efficient. In that, like, the best salesperson, you end up becoming the best, you give them the sales management job, but they're a shit manager. Or you're really good, on the tools, but you think to grow your business, you have to get off the tools. And, I know we spoke a lot about that, but it's this Peter principle that you kind of promote yourself one level above actually being good for the business. But that's where things like this framework, is helpful. I know that, there's a number of boards from large organizations, but they use the framework as the way for their management team to report on what they're focusing on. So if you are sort of that, that tradie who doesn't want to get off the tools, wants to spend time on the tools, but wants to make sure that the team are focusing on the stuff that actually is going to grow the revenue and grow the profit. One of the ways that, I've seen it work really well for businesses is have that framework as the way that your team comes to you once a month and say, look, here's where our numbers are. Here's the things that's driving profit. Here's our change in terms of the tracking in each of these areas. And this is the stuff we're implementing in this area this month to try and grow. And you use that as your management framework of the things you make sure that they're focusing on and keeping them accountable on while you're on the tools.
Absolutely.
So that's another way to do it, which I've seen work really well.
And I know in Gino Wickman's book, Traction, he talks about everybody in the company has a number. Yeah. And when we have our weekly meeting, everyone shows up and they've got a number. And that number will vary on what they do. But essentially, it's to say, well, are we on track here? And, and that will tie back to their scorecard. So if their scorecard saying we need to be getting 20 leads a week into our top of funnel, and they're not, we can say, well, how many have you got? 7. Why? So how do we fix this? And because if we're not doing this, and again, it comes back to data, like you were saying earlier, like it's important to have those numbers available to you so you can be agile and you can make decisions that can, where you can pivot early in the piece. Whereas, previously we do these meetings maybe once every 6 months, at which point it's far too late to make any agile decisions. And you can't shift to bring things back in trajectory when it's 6 months gone for the year. But if you do it weekly, you can. Yeah, I think a lot of those things tie back to regular communications and having a system and a process around communications.
I think that's where the service you offer to the traders is really important too, because it's not just about making the website look pretty. It's about creating the website that can generate leads, that has the elements of it that actually drives suspects, drive prospects, putting the CRM in there so you can actually have that data to increase transactions per client. So I think, the way you look at supporting your clients through the trading website business is really, really good in that regard as well. You're sort of helping people educate, not just deliver a service.
Well, I mean, and in truth, that is kind of true, but what we really try and just put the owners back in control of their assets, because the problem is if they've got websites which don't facilitate marketing, then they don't have the option, So we're more about, well, let's just equip you with all the tools you need so you can make decisions based on where you're at whatever point in time, but you have all the things you need to pull the trigger on these things, because essentially if you don't, you're exposed.
Absolutely.
So anyway, mate, this has been great. What's the best place for people to go and get more information about this?
Good question. Well, that's why I want to buy a phone system or a headset. I don't have much to sell. I think cadencebook.com is really the place to go, I think, in terms of grab the audio book, grab the hard copy book if you want. That's probably a good place to start. And, we're looking at doing some course off the back of it and things like that at some point. But really, the hard thing is that, our core businesses keep growing. So we just kind of double down where it actually is making the most revenue and profit for us, and try and do podcasts like this and share the book to kind of, help other business owners. But primarily, if I want a phone system, they can call me. But otherwise, cadencebook.com.
We might have a chat about that offline. So you do have a personal website as well, don't you? PeteWilliams.com.
Yeah, PeteWilliams.com.au. I kind of, got a few bits and pieces on there sort of for the, speaking gigs and stuff like that, but there's probably not a lot of value on that for people unless they want to kind of, go and read about me talking about myself, which is always good for my ego, but probably not that helpful. But PeteWilliams.com.au, if you want to actually reach out and say good day and ask me a question, that's the place to go to actually, if you want to get in touch with me directly.
I'd say to all you guys out there that are listening, that are watching this, head across to the show notes. We'll put some links to where you can get hold of Pete and get hold of his book. Again, you can find the book Cadence pretty much anywhere you buy your books. And there's also a website, which is cadencebook.com, CADENCE, as in cycling cadence.
Yeah.
Now, but I'd say first and foremost, guys, like those levers that we spoke about, suspects, prospects, conversions, average sale price, items per sale,
transactions
per client, and margins. I mean, if you sat down with a notepad over lunch and you had a look at some of those things and you could aim to, like Pete said, even shoot for a 10% increase in any one of them, you can't go far wrong. So, we try and do these podcasts with giving you an actionable outcome for each one of them. And I would say this is my challenge to you guys. And I know statistically, probably 3% of you guys are going to do this, but I can guarantee that those that do it are going to benefit from it. So I would say grab a notepad, write down suspects, prospects, conversions, average cost price, items per sale, transactions per client, and margins, and figure out where you can shoot for a 10% increase in any one of those. And then jump into the Facebook community and let us know what the results have been. And I'm sure if you've got any questions, Pete will come back on the show, I have no doubt.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And if you want to pull me into the Facebook group, I'll happily jump in there every now and again and answer some questions and stuff like that if that's helpful for people too. But also too, the other cool thing is if you get stuck trying to think about, well, hang on, how can I increase transactions per client? Go back through the past shows of the podcast. There's like some amazing episodes here that will actually give you ideas of how to actually, make improvements in some of these areas. So that's where kind of, having this foundational framework can be handy to actually really maximize past and future guests on the show to go, oh, okay, I can see how Tommy, who's on in 2 weeks' time, is actually going to be really helpful increasing this part of my business. And it really helps you kind of narrow in where that guest and their suggestions can actually help you grow, which is kind of cool as well.
And in truth, I think for most of the view, and this is certainly our experience with the agency, most trade businesses, they don't necessarily have a lead problem. They've got a re-engagement and a nurturing problem, which essentially is a communication problem.
Yeah,
so
love it.
There's a bit of a mindset around we need more leads, when the reality is you just need to look after the ones you've got better.
Increase your prospects, increase your conversion rate, increase your transactions per client. There's 3 other areas that can literally make a massive impact on your business other than just getting more people at the top of the funnel. Spot on.
Awesome, Pete. Thanks for your time. Listeners, once again, if you've got questions, hit us up in the Facebook group. Head across to the show notes if you want to get access to any of those links to get hold of Pete and the book. And we look forward to seeing your questions in the group. Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. And hope everyone has some success off the back of this.
Rock and roll. Ciao. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to thesiteshed.com where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.